Perhaps in the meanwhile, I would ask all speakers to kindly switch off mic and camera so that we will be activating it. We'll be inviting you to activate it throughout the different sessions. And we will be taking care of sharing centrally the PowerPoint presentation for you.
Okay, I think we have all the speaker available. So and also a good number of participants. So let's start. Dear all, let me welcome you to this workshop organized by the GovTech Connect project. The GovTech Connect project is a pilot project aiming to foster the digitization and the green transition of the public sector in Europe by leveraging the GovTech ecosystem. I'm Giovanna Galasso. I'm associate partner at Intellera Consulting and the project coordinator. But before getting into the agenda and the core objectives of the workshop, let me first give you an overview of the house rules of today's event. As David anticipated, only the speakers have their camera off and on and the Microsoft. But we kindly ask you to, if you have any question, feel free to post the questions during the webinar. Write them using the Teams chat function, because we will have some Q&A session during the meeting. We will be also recording this session for further project dissemination purposes. Next slide. First of all, the aim of the webinar. The purpose of today's webinar is to present the GovTech Connect project, managed by for the European Commission, and launch also our GovTech Connect community, which is an important part of this project. We will hear about, after this very quick introduction by myself, we will learn about the policy priority from a keynote representative from the European Commission. We have Gudrun Stock from DG Connect and Andrea Almos from Digit, which are the main DGs relevant for this project, and but also not only from the EU but also beyond, because we are happy to have Carlos Santiso from the USCT. Then we will have we will focus on the project. We will I will have here all our colleagues from the partners of the consortium that will give a very detailed overview of all the opportunities of this project. So we will present and launch the first two boot camps, but also you will receive information about the training opportunities, the 4 site studies, and also the GovTech community. Then my colleague David will moderate a panel of practitioners. We will have examples of initiatives across Europe supporting innovation reaching the public sector. Lars Persson Skendaval from GovTech Sweden, Camilla Gasiskan from GovTech Lab Lithuania, Yannis Giannarakis from DigiGov Greece, and Lucia Randonea from GovTech Lab Madrid. This is only the first one of this kind of these peer learning sharing opportunities, because you will see we'll organize several events during this project, and this we would like to organize several of this kind of peer learning exchange experience. Here we have the GovTech initiatives, European Digital Innovation Hubs. It will be nice in the next months also to have learn from experiences from the startups that will be also involved in the boot camps, and more opportunities. The idea is to finish at sharp at 4:04. So after this introduction, we will, let me introduce the keynote speakers. We we have the pleasure of having with us some of key representatives playing an important role in supporting the digitization of the public sector across Europe, but most of all with a specific focus on GovTech. We have Gudrun Stack, she's the Deputy Head of Unit of the Government and Trust Unit from the European Commission DG Connect. This is the unit in charge of our project, the GovTech Connect. In fact, Gudrun will give a presentation on the policy priorities, but our unit focusing on the main objectives of the GovTech Connect project. Andrea Almos is Deputy Head of Unit Interoperability in DG Connect. She has worked a lot for several years in DG Connect, also on GovTech, on digitization of government, but also in helping cities and communities better harness data and artificial intelligence to meet their environmental and climate objectives. And she will focus a lot in her presentation on the interoperable Europe app, the GovTech incubator. And Carlos Santizo, who works at the OECD as head of Digital, Innovative and Open Government Division in the Public Governance Directorate. He has a very, very long experience because he has worked in several countries and all around the world, has been the Director for Digital Innovation in Government and the Development Bank of Latin America, and also has headed the Innovation for Citizen Services Division at the Inter-American Development Banks. So he will give us a wider and broader view on the topic, on the GovTech ecosystem. So thanks a lot to our speakers. Feel free to all the participants, feel free to include comments in the chat and questions so that we can also have some questions for our keynote at the end. Gudrun, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes, okay, very good. So thank you very much for the floor, Giovanna. So it's really my pleasure to be the first keynote speaker at this GovTech Connect launch webinar and to welcome you here today. But before I zoom in on today's webinar and the project that it is launched under, I would like to give you a quick overview of the major aspects of the current Commission and EU framework governing the digital transformation. And this framework is called Europe's Digital Decade. The horizon is 2030. And it is a comprehensive framework that should ensure that all aspects of technology and innovation work for people. And this includes notably the Digital Decade Policy Program and Digital Decade targets that were first set in a communication by the Commission in March 2021 and have now been confirmed and discussed with member states in the context of the discussions of the Digital Decade Policy Program. And this digital compass that you see on the right of this slide, it was first introduced in the communication, and it is now equipped or complemented by the targets that were confirmed with member states in the discussions of the policy program. And all of that is accompanied or complemented by a set of digital rights and principles that were enshrined in a declaration that all three institutions, the Council, the Parliament, and the Commission, signed in the end of last year. And that should be really respected by all stakeholders in the digital transformation in the EU. So the Digital Decade targets, they are meant to be measurable goals that member states should achieve for each of the 4 areas covered by the compass and by this entire framework. And these areas are connectivity, digital skills, digital business, and also digital public services. And this is why we are here today, to learn a bit more about GovTech and how they can support digital public services. And the Digital Decade Policy Program that I already mentioned is a mechanism that was set up there to allow member states and the EU to work together and to help member states reach the Digital Decade targets and the objectives of the program. So I said it lays down a mechanism that will monitor progress towards 2030. It involves development of roadmaps by member states and regular monitoring for which the Commission will publish a report to take stock of progress every year and also make recommendations where or how member states can better achieve the targets if that is useful. And I mentioned already the digital principles. They reflect EU values and they promote a sustainable human-centric vision for the digital transformation. So now let me focus a bit more on what this means for government or for digital public services, which is one of the areas covered by the Digital Decade Framework. The targets that were set in this area is that by 2030, all key public services should be available online, but not only available, they should also be aligned with EU values and principles and also interoperable. And I think that's Andrea, who will follow me, will speak a bit more about interoperability. Then for e-health, it means that by 2030, all health records or medical records should be available online. And the third target is digital identity. And there, by 2030, all citizens, all EU citizens or people living in the EU should have access to a secure, privacy-enhancing digital ID. And in general, for the public sector, it means it should be data-driven. If it respects the values and principles in this framework and thus improve its capability to develop policies and services through the management, sharing and use of data. So the availability of public services on one hand is one target. And one important aspect in that respect is also the availability or access to digital ID, which can facilitate the access to such services. So I will focus in a little bit on the proposal for European Digital Identity Framework, which is also important in this regard. So, next slide, please. It's a proposal my unit submitted in June 21, revising the current eIDAS regulation. And many of you may know that the main novelty of this proposal is a personal digital wallet that will allow users who wish to use it to identify for access to both public and private services. And it will, in addition, allow users to share personal information about themselves in digital form. This could be their mobile driving license, it could be a digital travel credential, or a diploma, or an e-prescription, or a marriage certificate, to bring transactions with the public service fully online, or also with private services, of course. It will also allow users to make payments. And any personal data that are shared through the wallet should be under the sole control of the user, so that only such information is released through the wallet that is strictly necessary to gain access to the service, and not more. So this proposed framework is still under discussion. The trial of negotiations started at the end of March. We hope that it will be adopted by the end of this year, but this will depend, of course, on the discussions with the co-legislators. And well, depending on the deadline for implementation by member states that will be decided, the earliest that these wallets will actually be available to citizens is the end of 24, but more likely 2025. But also that depends, of course, on the deadline that the co-legislators will agree upon. But to help member states implement it, next slide, please, the wallets, or help them provide it, technical preparations for the deployment are ongoing at the same time and in alignment with the legislative process. So there we've already reached an important milestone, because the first version of the technical architecture for the wallet has been published on the 10th of February on GitHub. And from now on, there will be regular updates of the technical architecture as soon as new features have been integrated. The next two steps in the technical architecture, there are three steps that are intricately linked. So we will be funding also large-scale pilot projects that will test the wallet in concrete use cases. The official start date was the 1st of April, and they will last for 2 years. And based on the technical architecture, we are also in the process of developing a prototype wallet. And the requirements and the results of the pilots, the large-scale pilots, will iteratively enhance the technical architecture and the wallet prototype, and thus equip it with more features, so that by the end of the project, we will have a good prototype ready that member states can use if they wish, once they have the legal obligation to provide their citizens with the wallet. So next slide, please. So this was maybe a bit setting the frame for today's launch webinar, and to zoom in a bit more from the wider EU framework onto the project that today is launching its can I say the GovTech Connect initiative. So it was proposed by the European Parliament and is now implemented by the European Commission. And as such, the GovTech Connect pilot project is one of the many EU initiatives that will work to help achieve the digital targets for 2030 in the area of government. And as such, it is also central to the Europe's digital decade. GovTech is at the intersection of tech innovation and government services, and it involves the application of cutting-edge technology towards public services and also channeling the innovative power of startups and SMEs. And this is crucial if the targets are to be met by 2030. The project as such aims to support public administrations in the adoption of cost-effective digital solutions by introducing the GovTech ecosystem to the European public sector. And the cross-border work program that is part of this project will bring together SMEs and public and private GovTech game changers, investors and the civil society, academia, and also NGOs to mobilize the GovTech innovation ecosystem and forge solutions that will have a lasting impact after the end of the project. Its main objective, starting from an analysis of the GovTech market trends and initiatives, includes creating an ecosystem of public sector organizations and European GovTech players. And this will be done via coaching and training and a program to accelerate this that is dedicated to GovTech startups, and it will concentrate around 4 different boot camps. The project started at the beginning of this year, and it will last for 2 years and thus conclude in December 2024. And the consortium is led by Intellera Consulting, and the other partners are Politecnico di Milano, PUBLIC, and the Lisbon Council. And now a final slide to say a bit what operationally the GovTech project will focus on, how it will put its objectives into action. So we carry out a foresight study on GovTech market trends in Europe and put together an updated catalog of existing GovTech initiatives. It will organize 4 boot camps for startups and SMEs. And it will also practically implement a design thinking methodology as well as citizen engagement approaches for the development of GovTech solutions. And finally, also activate an online community of stakeholders, and this is the community that's being launched today, and create an ecosystem of public sector organization and of European GovTech players. That before GovTech sits at the intersection between public sector, startups, and SMEs, and it offers a variety of benefits for individuals and organizations involved. In particular, the project will offer opportunities for both companies, mainly startups, and also the public sector. GovTech startups will have the possibility to join a European community of innovators, receive support to better tailor their solutions to the actual needs of the end users, and thus getting closer to those who could be their primary business targets, namely public sector organizations. And the public sector bodies in turn, here the project will have the chance to access a wider range of innovative solutions, learn from relevant good practices and peers across Europe, and hopefully better achieve their digitalization goals with the final aim of serving better their users, namely the EU citizens. So this is why I, and mainly the consortium, of course, we together invite you all to join this new virtual community, the GovTech Connect Community, that is kick-starting today. And I hope you will all stay tuned for all the initiatives and events that will be organized in this context. So this concludes my presentation. Thank you, and I hand back to you, Giovanna.
Thanks a lot, Gudrun, for this very nice introduction to the project, and also to really ask everyone to join the community, because we will really, try over the next 2 years to organize not only to implement activities, but also to keep this, community up running, and I would also hope sustainable in the future after our project. I leave now the floor to Andrea Almos, because Andrea from Digit, she will complement the whole picture of the EU policy and activities in this area of GovTech.
Thank you very much, and thanks a lot for inviting us as well. Where I would like to start is really how GovTech helps digital innovation in government. And if I may just carry on from what you have heard from Gudrun on the digital decade targets, which you see on the bottom right-hand corner. What we also see is, in terms of policy context, is that, as you will have seen in the current Commission proposals and objectives, there is a clear ambition to make European economy data-driven and also help to benefit from AI capabilities and emerging technologies for the whole economy. What we see, however, is that for the whole economy to work, also the public sector, which is a very large segment of the European economy, must follow suit. Also, the public sector needs to become more data-driven, and therefore needs to benefit more from data-enabled innovation. In the Digital Decade Policy Program, there's also a notion that we have heard over the past almost 2 decades now, that the government should act as a government, as a platform to be able to create new services and build, perhaps also through different building blocks, reusable tools, new services. And this is something that we see, again, emerging and as a suggested path forward for digital transformation of government. And for that to happen, interoperability is key in the public sector in order to avoid further fragmentation, but also allow easy and seamless access to services and the reuse of essentially created new innovations. If we look at it from the point of view of the market, there is clearly a very interesting potential in creating a European GovTech market, especially because we know that through public procurement, government can pull huge innovation to the public sector, but also through their buying power can create an essentially large market segment. Now, if we look at it from the point of view of those small and medium-sized enterprises or startups, interoperability is key for them to be able to scale up their solutions, to actually go with their services to other EU countries. So we see that interoperability, be it from the point of view of the public sector or from the technology providers, viewpoint, is very crucial. However, if you show the next slide, we're not quite there yet. We are still limited in terms of interoperability of public services and data of public administrations. There's still an inefficient governance among administrations to how to manage and govern public sector interoperability. There's still a limited number of common specification standards and shared solutions. And what we also see in the public sector is there is still a cultural change to be made in order to move into just thinking of interoperability as an afterthought to actually thinking of interoperability by default from a moment that policy is perceived or designed all the way up until implementation. In order to overcome this challenge, if you show the next slide, the Commission has put forward a proposal for a regulation, first time ever. Although we've been working on public sector interoperability over the past 2 decades, this is the first time actually on the request of member states to create something more binding, to create a human-centric approach to interoperability that kind of goes through the whole of the policy-making cycle, that ensures a strengthened governance structure to enable public administrations to actually work together and share common interoperability solutions, and to create an ecosystem of these solutions so that everyone can contribute and reuse those solutions, innovate together and create public value. So last November, the Commission put forward a proposal for a regulation, the Interoperable Europe Act, which of course should support the targets of the digital decade, as we heard earlier, but also should move forward interoperable public services in the EU that should be interoperable also in the context of cross-border interoperability, which is our raison d'être in the Commission, but also in terms of interoperability between different domains in the public sector and different levels of government. So this regulation is currently in negotiation. It's accompanied by communication and some other documents, which I invite you to have a look. And the next slide actually shows that this proposal includes a number of concrete opportunities for the GovTech ecosystem. In terms of its governance, it foresees the creation of an Interoperable Europe board, which would group together the member states, the European Commission, Economic and Social Committee, and the Committee of the Regions. And this would be the governing body of the Interoperable Europe Act. And this Interoperable Europe board may actually propose the Commission to set up innovation measures to support the development and deployment of interoperability solutions. And these would essentially involve GovTech actors. So we will be looking at areas where interoperability solutions would be needed. There are gaps that would be identified. And then we would somehow look at measures or explore different measures on how to support the development and deployment of these. In addition to that, there's an aim to facilitate the development of an open European GovTech ecosystem. So we will be continuing our efforts with the project that we're discussing today, but also others, and try to create this community, which we're starting today, to create a real European GovTech ecosystem. In addition, this Interoperable Europe Act also foresees the possibility to identify interoperability solutions that may be recommended for reuse by public administrations. These would be then labeled in the Interoperable Europe portal as those Interoperable Europe solutions. So, of course, it's interesting for all of you to not only join the community of this GovTech Connect project and beyond, but also to eventually join another part of this governance structure, which will also include something called the Interoperable Europe Community, which would then be feeding into the discussions and the so-called agendas of the Interoperable Europe Board. Next slide, please. We've already heard about, of course, the project, the GovTech Connect project, but there's also a number of other activities that I wanted to just briefly explain to you that are ongoing in the Commission around GovTech. We have our research organization in the Commission called the Joint Research Center, and they've developed a number of reports on GovTech. We also have a GovTech incubator project that I will be very soon formally launched. I see some members of that project also online today. We have the GovTech Connect platform, and we're also planning with the JRC to develop a new handbook on GovTech. And I know there's going to be the Foresight study and many others, but just to have this list somehow as a coherent group of initiatives. We're trying to understand the scene of GovTech in Europe. We're looking into experimentation. We're looking at the platform as a way to collaborate and, of course, create these boot camps and the Foresight study, but also looking at how to create more guidance. So if you just very quickly go through the next 4 slides, this gives you a further information on these reports, which you can then later click on. Sorry, just back to the 2 reports. One is a mapping report of the GovTech ecosystem. The other is a number of use cases. The next slide shows the GovTech incubator project, which will soon start and will run pilots with the network of incubators in the EU, a huge number of member states with their GovTech labs partnering here. And we're very much looking forward to those pilots that will actually develop something reusable in cross-border experimentation pilots. Then, of course, we have the next slide, the GovTech Connect project, where we're asking you to further collaborate as we're doing today as a launch in terms of the community. And we will have, next slide please, a GovTech handbook that will further build on the previous two JRC reports and will look at good practices, ways to scale up GovTech solutions, and also analyze common issues of public administrations. And just to conclude, I know many of the partners, or several partners, both in the, if you show me the next slide, please, several partners in both the GovTech Connect project and the incubator come from the area of so-called digital innovation hubs. And so we were discussing how to best explain the link between the two, and I thought it would be interesting to show a slide on how we see the collaboration between these types of organizations. The European Digital Innovation Hubs are being funded under Digital Europe, and they're regionally set organizations that help in the digital transformation of the European economy. Some of them focus on the public sector and in particular AI. And so these could really be helpful in the concrete deployment of solutions, perhaps developed or tested in GovTech labs. They can also act as multipliers to reach out to more administrations within a given region, or act as brokers between administrations and the GovTech companies, but also can help perhaps GovTech companies reach more market potential in other parts of Europe. And some of these, as I said, focus on AI, and actually those that focus on AI will have their own so-called specific working group. And the first of such working group meeting is scheduled for the 28th of April. But also, as I said, I know the two projects include several hubs themselves, so it's interesting to explore the linkages. And my very last slide is that what we're expecting from the project and the community, if you show me this, is really to try and help or foster this collaboration for the creation of interoperability of digital tools for the public sector, fostering experimentation also across borders, identify essentially missing solutions that may be developed by the GovTech community, and then please join the Join Up community to further discuss and share these good practices, and to the extent possible, and when it makes sense, engage with the digital innovation hubs. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Andrea, for really complement, 360 degrees, I would say, the whole picture, and also for some input for us, because also this focus this request to focus on interoperability, because this is also a topic that we could also, take into account during the boot camps. But also at least we will try also to, let's say, see how we can with this GovTech platform really work in synergy, not in in silos, but in synergy with all these others activities in the GovTech area. Now let's listen to I think the very interesting presentation also from Carlos that will give us a wider view, I would say, maybe regarding Europe, but also outside.
Yes, yes, thank you, Giovanna. Can you hear me well? Yeah, and really thank you also for Andrea Gundrun, also the very rich presentation about the work of the European Commission, and I'm quite delighted to be here with you also this afternoon on my side to share some of our thoughts and work from the OECD. Obviously, many congratulations for the European Commission, because I think you are doing a fantastic work in promoting and fostering GovTech ecosystems in Europe. And I think there's a lot of initiatives that are ongoing and that we were presented about the GovTech Connect, but also the GovTech Incubator and many others. So we're quite delighted there. Also, thank you also for the GovTech Consortium to invite us to share our thoughts in Stella, Public, Lisbon Council, and the Politecnico di Milano. And if you go to the next slide quickly as well, I think the European Commission and the OECD, we share a lot of things around about the GovTech, the approach to GovTech ecosystems, and what we mean by GovTech ecosystems and how they can contribute to accelerate the digital transformations of governments, because at the end of the day, this is more about, this is actually more about transforming governments using technology and data insights in particular, and how governments can collaborate with startups in accelerating that innovation in government. And here you see, for example, our approach and our definition around what we mean by a digitally enabling, data-driven public sector that is digital by design, that is data-driven, as Andrea was saying, that is acts as a platform, but it is also open by default, user-driven and proactive. And in particular, user-driven, because I think a lot of the issues that are also driving the GovTech ecosystem is about reconnecting citizens with governments through digital innovations and putting citizens at the center to improve lives and improve services. And in that transformation of governments that is digitally propelled, GovTech startups have an important role, or GovTech innovation, which is basically also driving that transformation. So one of the important things that we see in our framework is also how these acceleration of government working with startups in the GovTech ecosystems can really help meet changing and rising citizens' expectations about the quality of services that are provided and the responsiveness of governments to those. And also, they also help overcome some of the traditional methods that have shown also their limits, especially in trying to uptake and incorporate digital new technologies, in particular artificial intelligence, and digital government units or public procurement with traditional suppliers have their limits, are not always enough to achieve digital government strategies, especially when we consider the pace of innovation. And we've seen the last debate around whether ChatGPT will be also part of this revolution or transformations. So therefore, for us, GovTech is also the way that governments can safely experiment and test before scaling tech innovations in the public sector, and also providing more opportunities to foster local SMEs and local entrepreneurship. So if you go to the next slide, I think what we share also with the Commission is that for us also GovTech is really a new forms of public-private partnerships between, on one side, governments that are in increasing demand for innovation in the way they operate, but also on the other side, startups that are also providing more and more innovations for the public sector. And it's quite interesting when you look at the last 5 years or so, when you have a new generations of startups that also want to have profits, but also want to have a social impact working and to have a public value working with governments as well. So in this relationship that was not necessarily meant to happen, because these are very different cultures in the way you operate between, on the one side, bureaucracies that are trying to accelerate their innovation, and on the other startups that have a mode of operation that is very agile, that is very risky, and also experimental in approach. These are two worlds that were not necessarily supposed to meet, and in the GovTech ecosystems they are meeting, and that's why also from the OECD we find very exciting as a new way to transform public services, transform government. And obviously in between, also as Andrea Gundrun was saying, you have public policy tools that are helping both sides of the equation, both, let's say, the data infrastructure that public sector provides for startups to develop solutions, but also the procurement framework through which governments are procuring and buying those innovations from the marketplace, the startup marketplaces. And I think there's a lot of issues and challenges because, for example, public procurement in the public sectors around the world are not necessarily always the most risk averse. I mean, are often risk averse, and they're not necessarily experimenting. And actually, when you look at the culture of public procurement in many countries, public procurement is actually buying a solution, while the GovTech ecosystems, what we're trying to achieve in this dialogue is actually buying problems and finding a solution together to a public policy problem that helps improve the delivery of services to citizens. So if you go to the next slide there, what is also exciting is that these worlds are starting to talk all over the world. Here you see a lot of the GovTech incubators, accelerators around the world. I think I will just underscore two things in this global panorama of GovTech is that first, you have increasingly a lot of governments like Lithuania, for example, Luxembourg, that are also having their own GovTech acceleration labs. And I think the GovTech incubator VC will be very, very useful in that sense. And there you see a lot of demand from innovation labs in governments for those solutions. And on the other side, you also see the rise of a lot of supply of these innovations, including increasing interest by in the investor community and venture capital and philanthropic capital, social impact investors in that space. I think the other point I would just mention when you look at the sort of global picture on GovTech is the critical role of cities or local governments. Many of them are also entering the GovTech space because a lot of the public services or public problems that these GovTech ecosystems are trying to find solutions to tend to be also a lot of local problems, local service delivery. And those are the services that people care most about, especially when you see the competencies of local governments and cities. So that's why you see, for example, in Argentina, Cordoba, that is innovating quite a bit in the municipality. In Spain, the Basque Country, Vizcaya government is also quite an interesting case. But so you see in that global picture is also very local in the services and the solution that they are providing. So if you go to the next slide here as well, some of the things we've seen at the OECD around the GovTech space and how it can add value also to the existing digital government agenda or the digital transformation of governments. One of the things that we see, for example, is GovTech as also a part of the solutions that we face in terms of digital government investments or in public investments in digital transformation, which are very challenging for various reasons, but also have a lot of challenges in terms of being able to deploy new technologies, to test and experiment new solutions before scaling them. So the GovTech ecosystems have also an important and critical role to play in the broader public investment chain of digital investments in government. And we see that these solutions are being deployed in different areas. And for example, we've worked with Luxembourg that has a very interesting experiment around their GovTech lab by the Ministry of Digitalization that are also trying to find solutions through a sort of nationally driven lab. We see other countries that are also venturing into very complicated and challenging ways, like Portugal has just launched a GovTech program in the justice sector, which is a very challenging sector for these solutions in particular, and actually are already piloting a ChatGTP tool for civil justice programs. We've been working with our colleagues with the CAF Development Bank of Latin America, especially in Latin America, where there's a lot of innovation going on, for example, in Brazil, with the Brazil Lab and other experiments that the government is also incubating into its own approaches. One of the things we've seen, and just to delve a little bit more on Brazil, but also France, for example, is that also some countries are also experimenting a way to incubate those innovations within public administration, what they called state startups or intrapreneurs, where basically you build startups within public administrations to accelerate that innovation. The point there is, I think there's also, we need to be open also about the different ways that GovTech is being pursued in different contexts as well. We also are in the final stages of our latest digital government index that will be released later this year, in which we will gather a lot of data about the enabling environment for GovTech ecosystems. And that's an important work that we're starting also with the support with some countries, in particular Lithuania, to look at what are the policy levers that governments, national and subnational, can deploy and use effectively to promote and foster these ecosystems, being from labs, from procurement for innovation in the public sector, but also investment funds that are publicly funded as well. And we will be launching soon also an innovation incubator that will also look at some of these GovTech solutions or tech-based solutions. I think some of the things that we see coming out, also some of the good practices that OECD countries and also partner countries have been deploying in terms of ensuring, for example, early market engagement with the startup ecosystems to work together so that there's a better understanding of the logics of the public sector and also the logics of the startup systems. Sometimes they are quite afar. Also deploying flexible funding mechanisms that foster and relax some of the rigidities around budgeting and procurement rules. And I think the public procurement issues are probably the biggest barrier that we all face in these ecosystems. I think here the European Union has been quite also at the forefront of public procurement for volume innovations. If you go to the next slide, and this is some of the things that we're going to also be doing this year around the GovTech understanding and ecosystems around OECD countries and partner countries. The first thing that we will also help here is to have a little bit of a better, or let's say common understanding of what GovTech ecosystems are and how they can contribute to the digital transformation of governments. Because as the European Commission, the OECD, we understand GovTech as being this public-private partnership between governments and startups that are adding value to the digital transformation of government. It is not about digitalizing government or accelerating digitalization of government, but it's really about promoting innovation in that space. And we will develop key issues papers around what are the policy levers that governments have to promote this system. And we hopefully, in the medium term towards later this year, develop a policy framework of those levers that includes a guidance to governments on how to achieve better return on investment by working with GovTech ecosystems. And this is building on the work of the working party of senior digital government officials of the OECD that has just established a GovTech working group to develop this issues paper. At the end of the year, we will probably also have more data to better measure the maturity of the enabling environment for GovTech ecosystems that will be drawing upon our digital government index that is being published towards the end of the year. And we will also develop a toolkit for governments on, again, what are the policy strategies and capabilities that they can deploy for this system. And we very much look forward to collaborating with the EC on some of these issues, for example, around the handbook that you are also planning to do. So if you go also to the next slide here, just to thank you, really excited to see this GovTech Connect community taking off the ground also in Europe, and really looking forward to continue this dialogue, collaboration and conversation with you. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Carlos, and also thanks a lot, for being so open to follow this project, because I'm sure that we will keep bothering you during the next 2 years also to exchange and share experiences. I would also see if there are some questions. There is a question, a very interesting question for you, Carlos. I think from George from DG Connect, concerning funding. If the OECD provide funding for specific projects, and if I can, I would also ask you one question, because you have been also working a lot in Latin America. If you see differences between the GovTech ecosystem in Europe and when you work compared to you working there, so these first two questions are for you.
So thank you, Giovanna. I'll try to answer. I mean, on the first one, the OECD does not provide, is not a funding agency per se. What we do is provide policy and technical advice to our member governments, working with and through our committees, especially the Digital Government Committee, but also the Public Innovation Committee, so that we also help them with better sort of policy tools. that is complemented by applied research or policy relevant research that is based on data that is gathered from member states. So it's also providing better evidence about what these policy tools are and how they're working. So in that sense, we are more in the business of providing advice to our governments on how to tackle some of these challenges, rather than funding specific GovTech challenges that we do sometimes in collaboration with governments. For example, we'll work with the government of Portugal on some of these issues. But the OECD is not a direct funding agency or an implementation agency in the traditional sense. And then you were saying about the differences. I think it's quite fascinating, because I see more like commonalities of approach in different ways. I see a common really thrust for innovation in the different public sectors, especially because civil servants there's also young digital native civil servants really want to make governments deliver better for citizens and improve lives. And I think there's a lot of commonalities in terms of the purpose and intent. And I see also a lot of commonalities, as I was saying, in the startup community, in the sense that you have much more of these startups that really want to have a social impact in different ways. And obviously, these are very different contexts, because Latin America is more informal, is more unequal, and maybe can do, I mean, has a different degree of maturity, let's say, in general. But what we see, there's a lot of leapfrogging that GovTech allows governments. So I think what is fascinating about this role is that, you know, there's a lot of differences, but also a lot of commonalities. And I think, as I was saying, what is common is really about this focus on local problems, on problems that impact people's lives every day. And then when you go local, you see that there are much more similarities between big cities that are trying to deploy these solutions as well for those problems. You see cities like Sao Paulo are doing a lot of things like London is also doing. Bogota is collaborating also with Madrid. So I think there are more commonalities in terms of the approach, the understanding. I mean, as long as you understand the GovTech ecosystem as being a new way to innovate in the public sector by building bridges between bureaucracies and startups.
Thank you, Carlos. I would like to also ask a question to Andrea, and then maybe we continue, because it's otherwise we don't have enough time for the rest of the agenda. You have presented this very important proposal, the Interoperable Europe Act, where the GovTech has a very important law. So it really means that the GovTech is relevant for the European Commission at the moment. If I remember correctly, the proposal was launched in November, if I remember correctly, so some months ago. How do you think it has been received from the member states and from the ecosystem?
I think there's a very clear positive response. So we started discussing with the Council, and Parliament is also preparing its opinion. Economic and Social Committee and the Committee of the Regions are very close to finalizing their opinions. The response is very positive, long awaited, to have a stronger interoperability approach in Europe, to ensure that interoperability actually becomes part of the culture, the way we perceive or conceive public services and even legislation in future. From the point of view of GovTech, there is also quite an interest. As Carlos was saying, it's kind of a new way of looking at how public-private partnership will evolve in future. There's quite an interesting timing also, because many large investments in IT are becoming due to be rethought and perhaps bought, and there is perhaps a new way of bringing more innovation through smaller players into the public sector. However, those elements that those smaller players will bring in will need to be interoperable in order to be able to work properly in an administration. So the timing is interesting. We have heard from actually from the Economic and Social Committee in particular. They're quite keen on seeing a large, let's say, opportunity for the GovTech sector, but it's to be seen. We're still in a negotiation phase, and most likely we won't have a final adoption before early next year. But as I said, the responses are so far positive.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. I would like to really thank you, Gudrun, Andrea, and Carlos. I think we will have you for sure with us also in next events that we'll be organizing.